the video to the particular place that you're interested in. Okay, so it's my understanding that many of you may already have the deduper, whereas others do not have it yet, but are considering maybe purchasing it, but you were fearful of using it, or you were uncomfortable using it in certain cases, so you may not have extensively used it so far. So I'd like to cover some of the typical uses of the deduper, and then in addition to that, maybe cover some of the more advanced topics, assuming that we have some time left, in the webinar. So again, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to speak up, and I'll try to address those as best I can along the way. Just a little bit of background on the deduper and its history. My name's Clay. I am the developer of the Embroidery Deduper software, and essentially the lady I live with, Pat, she's addicted to embroidery, and it turns out several years ago she had amassed a large collection of embroidery designs on her computer hard drive by downloading massive amounts of them from the internet, like for a number of years. So it turns out that a lot of the problems she was having with her organization was she would download files, and they would normally come in zip files, and inside of those zip files there were multiple formats of the same design, but she only had a brother machine, so she really just needed one of the formats. So in addition to that, she would sometimes download the same file multiple times, not realizing she had already downloaded it in the past. Or when she would convert from one format to another, her software would append a sequence number to the end of the design file, so she would have a lot of duplicate designs and a lot of stuff that she had no need to keep, like the extraneous formats and that sort of thing. And furthermore, she would download zip files, and sometimes it would be she would never even get around to unzipping the original zip files because she was too busy downloading new stuff. So eventually she would have large amounts of these files, downloaded and embedded throughout her folder system, and she would never go back to clean them up. So I was working for IBM at that time as a traveling consultant. So since I was generally out of town during the week and staying in hotel rooms, and I was a computer geek, she figured why not have me write her a program to do all of this stuff automatically for her, and so on and so forth while I was at the hotel at night. So so that's kind of some of the origin, and naturally, as with most things, it's not as simple as it initially seemed like it would be, because there's all these complications that come into play. So it actually took me a little over 2 years to write the first version of the software. So anyway, a lot of people, it turns out, have the same problem with having way too many designs and not enough time to get rid of the stuff they don't want. So we were encouraged by many people to offer this as a product to the embroidery community. So that's kind of the origin and the background of the deduper and how it came about. So in order to use the deduper, there are a couple of settings that are really important, and then the other settings are just depending upon your preferences, and you may or may not want to change them from the default behavior. So I'd like to cover those and discuss each setting and why it's important and why you may or may not want to use that. So it's easiest to do that by way of an example. If we take a look here, it's pretty common for someone to have a folder, and you might use this for your new downloads, like if you download stuff from the internet and you pile it all into one folder first before you're going to sort it out. But you can also think of this as one of your category type folders, such as your angels folder or your lace folder or something along those lines. The main distinction about this first example is that we have a folder, and we don't want any duplicates under the whole darn folder. So just keep that in mind, that although we're calling this downloads, it could very easily represent any folder that you have that you don't want any duplicates under the whole darn folder. Now, in this folder, let me just make sure is turned on. Okay. So in this folder, you can see we have several files here. One is that we have some rose designs, but if you'll notice, they're just different formats of the same darn design. We also have a susan.zip file, which presumably has designs inside of it. And we have prettylace.zip, freebie by susan.zip, and that one is curiously similar to susan.zip. So that's an example of where we've downloaded the same file twice, perhaps from two different places, but it's named differently. Lastly, we have something called Cherry Bowl, and this is a .rar file. Now, for those of you who don't know, a RAR file is conceptually the same as a zip file. You can think of it as being logically the same. It works just like a zip file. From a technical perspective, there's a different compression algorithm that's used. And actually a RAR file gets better compression than a zip file, but you don't see it as much in the US as you would over like in the European countries. It's used more in Europe than it is over here. But in any case, you can think of it generically as a zip file. So whenever I say something about something is unzipping or I'm referring to a zip file, what I'm really meaning is a zip file or a RAR file. They're both treated the same as far as the deduper is concerned. The important thing is that to know is just that it can do either one, a zip or a RAR file. So let's go ahead and dedupe this, and we'll cover over the settings that are important. So we want to start up the deduper software, and as we can see, it normally starts up in a blank form. So I think in some cases when people first get the deduper, it comes up with a blank screen, and right away it's not intuitive as to what are you supposed to do next. So some people get frightened just from the very first screen here, and I'm working on ways to improve that, to raise awareness of what needs to be done next. But in the meantime, when you first start up the deduper, you'll come up with this kind of blank screen. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up some settings for the deduper so that it knows how to process the folders according to your preferences. The way we do that is we go up to Edit and Preferences, and it'll pop up a window here. So you'll see there's multiple tabs here. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's two settings that are really, really important, and then the other settings are just tweaking it depending upon, what your particular preferences are. So the first of the really two important preferences is this part here. Under the Formats tab, we have the File Type Priority. And what this means is, notice how we have a whole slew of embroidery stitch extensions here. These are for the stitch files that would be used on your machine to sew out the designs. So the file type priority is just that. It's a priority list. So what this is saying in this particular example is that the PEZ format, I prefer that over any other format because I have Brother and that's it. So if you see for a given design, if you see a PEZ format of that particular design available, keep that one and remove all the other formats because I don't care about those. Now, if for some reason there was not a PEZ format of that particular design, it would then go one step down to see if a HUS format is available. And if that wasn't available anywhere, it would look to see if a JEF is available, and so on and so forth. So this is a priority list where your most preferred format is listed at the top, and it goes all the way down to your least preferred format. In this case, it's a Toyota commercial format for a Toyota commercial. But essentially, this is just saying cascade down through this list until you find a format that is available. Like say if it's only available in the Singer XXX, then at least keep that one. And then anything lower than that is less preferred than this one. So it's recommended that those be removed. Okay, does anyone have questions on the file type priority, the general concept of it?
Where does it show you what you say?
I'm sorry, it sounded like someone was speaking, but I had difficulty hearing you. Okay, again, if you have a question and for some reason I'm not responding, it must be because I can't hear you. So feel free to type that out in the chat window there, and I'll try to respond. Okay, so there was a question from Debbie, and it's where does it show you where it is saved? And we'll cover that shortly because that's handled by way of the duplicate summary window. So we'll definitely cover that. I noticed Debbie had mentioned on our website that she was afraid to use it, to use the deduper in general, and I think that's just really just not a full understanding of how to work it. So we're hoping to rectify that here. So I'll show you where it will where it will show you which files it's keeping and which ones it intends to delete and all of that stuff. But in this particular setting, I just wanted to show the logic that's involved when it does what's called preferred format processing. And it's just all based on this priority list here. So now if for some reason you don't have Okay, so another question was from Mary, and she says, well, what if you have PEZ and HUS and they're not available? Will all the others be deleted? So I think the question is, so some people are concerned if, let's say that I have PEZ selected as my most preferred type, well, what if I have a set of designs that only came in the XXX format, for example? What is the deduper going to delete those because I don't have my most preferred format available? And the answer is no, it will leave them, and it's because of this priority list. So in this particular example, we're saying we like PEZ over anything else. But if PEZ is not there, see if a HUS is available. But if that's not there, see if a JEF is available. And if that's not there, DST, and so on. Now eventually, it would come down to the XXX format, because nothing was found that was more preferred for that particular design. And then XXX will be the most preferred format that was available, so it will still keep that one. It will keep that one because it was still the best one that could be found. So you don't have to convert all of your designs to your most preferred format, thinking that the deduper might delete them if they're not, because it won't. That was the whole purpose of the file type priority. That's why it was created. Like for example, Pat, since she has a brother machine, she preferred a PEZ format, but in case it wasn't available, the PEZ format, they usually at least come in a JEF or a HUS format. So she would still rather have one of these over a DST format, because the DST doesn't contain the color palette information, so it looks hideous on your screen, as some of you may know. So the whole point of the priority list is that even if your best one isn't found, you still might prefer another format over some of these others. So just keep going down this list until you find the best format that you can, the one closest to the top of the list, and keep that one. I hope that answers your question, Mary. And then we'll also cover the ability to save more than one format if that's what you would like. But again, if you only have one brand of machine and you only need to keep one format for your particular machine, all you have to do is set up this file type priority in the correct order that you prefer you prefer your formats in, and it will save the best one that it can find. Now, as we can see, there are some presets here. Brother is the first one, and that's what it defaults to. There's really no reason for it defaulting to brother other than the fact that we just have brother machines and baby locks, so it happened to work out nicely for us. But and you have to default to something. So that's why it's set up here. But if for some reason you don't like the way this is set up, you can customize it however you see fit. So there's like a Genome preset, and as you can see, that prefers JEF format over others. There's a Viking preset, which that's mainly for the older Viking machines with the HUS format. If you have a newer Viking machine where you use VP3, or a FOF that uses VIP, in those cases you'd want to use the custom list. So the point here is that if you don't like any of these presets, you can always use the custom list and then alter this list however you see fit. If you'll notice, these two arrows popped up when I click custom. And let's say that you had a Singer machine and you use the XXX format. Well, in custom mode, you can select this format and then click this up button, and notice how it moves it all the way to the top there. Now, secondly, for whatever reason, you might have a Melco commercial machine and you like EXP if it's there. So what we want to do is move that to the second and so on. So the point is that you can rearrange this list however you want, but the important thing to understand is that your most preferred format is the top of the list, and then your least preferred is the very bottom, and the deduper will look for the best format when it's doing preferred format processing in order of this list from top to bottom. Now, whenever you make a change in the settings, this line here will appear near the bottom of the preferences window that says save these as my default preferences for future projects. You'll want to make sure that that is checked. That way, in the future, if you create a new project, you don't have to reset all of these settings every time. It will just remember it will remember those settings each time you create a new project. So this would be a very handy thing to use after you've modified this stuff as to how you would like to have it. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to switch back to the brother preset, but I hope it makes sense as to what the heck we were talking about there with this whole priority list business. It's just a way to keep the best format that it can find, which ideally would be the one on the top of your list. But if it's not available, it'll still keep the best one that it can find.
Okay.
Now, some people actually have more than one machine. So, for example, let's say that we had a Janome machine and a brother machine. So we might like to keep Jeff and Pez. Now, by default, in this case, if it found a Jeff format of a given design, if it later found a Pez format of that same design, it would want to remove the Pez format, thinking that it's less preferred than a Jeff format. But if you want to keep... I'm sorry, someone asked if we could please mute everyone. So everyone is on mute at the moment. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, if you could please put that in the chat window, and then I'll respond, or I'll unmute it for you to ask the question. I guess there's some background noise there, so we're going to try to lessen that. So thank you, Joy, for pointing that out to me. So, she said it's much better. That's good. So, sorry about that, everyone. I have the volume turned down substantially here, so it was hard for me to tell that there was a lot of background noise going on. So hopefully it's better now. And again, just chat me if you have a question. So if we wanted to keep both Jeff and Pez formats, then now we've got a problem, because it's going to want to remove that Pez format if we already have a Jeff for that same design. So the way we get around that is there's a thing called retain additional types. So by default, we can see this list is blank. But if we click Edit List, you'll see all these other formats come up. Now we can pick any number of additional formats that we can that we would like to save. So in this case, we want to pick Pez. Now all this is saying is the Retain Additional Types panel just says, during preferred format processing, if you otherwise would have deleted this format because there's a more preferred format available of a given design, don't delete it. Just hang on to it anyway, because I'd still like to keep it along for the ride. So you may wonder, well, why didn't I put Jeff here too? Because I want to keep Jeff and Pez. Well, the reason is you certainly could do that, but it's not necessary. And that's because the Jeff format is already your most preferred format. So if that's available, it will always keep that format of the design. The one that's in question is something that is not already at the top of the list, and that would be your Pez format. So the Pez format, because of Retain Additional Types processing, if you already had a Jeff format, when it comes down here, it would normally want to remove the Pez version of that because of preferred format processing. But instead, it will keep it because it's in the Retain Additional Types panel. And again, just to be clear, if you only had, so if we go here and clear this, if you only had the Pez version of a given design, even though this is blank, it will still keep just the Pez version because it's already your most preferred format. So I just want to be clear there that you don't have to have anything in here unless you intend to keep more than one format. So again, if you have questions about that, let me know. but I hope that's clear. I know a lot of people get confused by that, and they're concerned about what formats will be saved, but that was the whole purpose of the creation of the format, the file type priority list. It was based upon the knowledge that a lot of times you won't have a design in your best format that you can find, that you'd prefer, like Pez, if you own a brother. But you still, even from what's there, you'd still rather keep a HUS over a DST because you still like the color palette information being embedded in the design. Okay, so does anyone have questions on the file type priority? If you do, just click on that chat there and let me know. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next setting. Okay then, so I'll carry on to the next setting. And again, if you have questions, just feel free to chat there and they'll unmute you so that you can ask, or just type your question directly in the chat window. So the next setting, so again, the file type priority is a very important setting, and I hope you understand why. And the next important setting is this dedupe level setting. And this is a little confusing to people, but I'm hoping I can clarify it here. The first level, dedupe level setting, which is the default, all it's saying is that when you tell the deduper to scan a folder, you're saying to maintain uniqueness at the very first level of that folder. In other words, I don't want any duplicates under the entire folder. Now, it does not say how deep to go in the folder to look for duplicates. The deduper always looks at all subfolders and their subfolders to unlimited depths for the duplicates. So that is not what this is saying. This is the level to maintain uniqueness at. So the first level just says, if I told you to scan my angels folder, I don't want any duplicates under that whole darn thing. So the first level dedupe level is the default behavior, and it's the appropriate setting for almost all cases. About the only time you would possibly not want to use first level is if you were deduping your entire embroidery folder at the top level. And the reason for that is that some people purposely like to keep duplicates across category folders. So for example, if you had a lace angel design, you might purposely have a copy of that under angels and under lace, so that depending upon how your brain happens to be working that day when you're looking for the design, you might be looking under angels for it or under lace for it. So if you were to dedupe your whole embroidery folder at a level 1, then the deduper, rightly so, would find that the one under lace was a duplicate of the one under angels and would want to remove it. And so we'll talk shortly about how you can still allow that to happen. But and that's by way of the second level, and there's also another way of doing it, and we'll cover that shortly. But I just wanted to point out that most of the time, the first level is perfectly that's perfectly appropriate for what you're wanting to dedupe. It just means that I don't want any duplicates under the whole darn folder. And also what you'll find is the difference between this demonstration and the one right after this is only this one setting. So now those are the two most important settings. All of the others are just tweaking things depending upon how you like to do stuff. The only ones that have substantial effect on the actual processing of stuff is this file type priority, because the deduper doesn't know what type of machine or what formats you prefer over others until you tell it what you like. And this here, the dedupe level setting. And the only time that you can potentially mess this up is if you do your whole embroidery folder at a level 1 and you didn't really mean to do that. And again, the only thing it will affect is if you purposely created duplicates across your categories, it will find those extra duplicates and want to remove them. It won't do any more harm than that, but that's just one thing that may not be desired. Now, for the next tab is the duplicate file handling tab, and there's a few different sections of this one. Under here, we notice the first option is just delete the duplicates. I'm not aware of anyone that actually uses this option, and I wrote this software, and I still don't use this option. I think it's a human thing that you just get warm fuzzies when you have something prompt you, with its findings, and then you click the OK button to carry on. So it just improves the comfort level substantially when you can at least view it. I have complete confidence in what it's doing, but still, it's just helpful to see what it found, and then click OK manually, to me anyway. So the default behavior here is to prompt me before actually deleting the duplicates. Now, some people, instead of deleting the duplicates, they would prefer to keep those duplicates but move them off to a separate area so that they can back them up or whatever the case may be, particularly if you don't really trust it so much to begin with. You might want to do that because you might be a little more paranoid than maybe I would be, for example. So if you're one of those people, you can click this option to move the duplicates to the duplicates folder. I'll manage them there myself. Now, we'll talk about shortly where this duplicates folder is located. But what all this is saying is that instead of deleting the duplicates, it's going to move them off over to this other area, and then you can do with them what you want. But as far as the deduper is concerned, they're out of the picture once it moves them. So it'll throw them over there, and then it's up to you to do something with them, like back them up to a CD or a DVD, or most people nowadays that I'm aware of that use this feature, they actually have an external hard drive, like a USB hard drive, and they'll have like a embroidery duplicates folder created there, and they'll move all of their duplicates over to there. So it's on an external hard drive, and that seems to work quite nicely for them. Just to point out, if you do use this option, you'll notice that this other line appeared here. It'll be checked by default, and just don't ever uncheck that. Just leave it checked, because almost everyone that would want to move the duplicates to the duplicates folder, they also want this to happen. Just trust me on that one. In hindsight, I regret that I ever made this part optional, but I did, so it defaults to being checked. So I would recommend that you just leave that checked, and that will likely produce the behavior you were expecting to begin with. So so just leave that checked if you intend to move these off to the duplicates folder. For this particular demo, though, I'm going to just click the normal prompt me before deleting the files, the duplicate files. But otherwise, the behavior is the same. And again, we'll talk about where that duplicates folder is located and how to change it in just a minute. The next option here is to detect duplicates of non-embroidery files also. So by default, the Embroidery Deduper only processes embroidery stitch files. And by that, what we mean is the extension is one of these extensions listed here. These are embroidery stitch files, which are the files that you would put on your card or floppy disk or USB stick drive to sew it out on your machine. Whatever medium it takes, that's the actual file you would put onto the storage so that your machine would sew it out. Now, there are other types of files that people might think are embroidery files, but they're technically not. Those would be things like if you do digitizing, depending upon what software you use, it will it will create embroidery object files, and those are files only to be used by that program. So like the generation software package, it saves files in the .gen format, or the Embird Studio, which is the digitizing portion of Embird, it saves files in the .eof format. But either way, those files, although you're using them for embroidery purposes, they're actually not stitch files. Sorry, just one moment. Someone is chatting. Mary, she actually keeps losing the sound because she's having bad storms in that area. So I'm just wanting to inform her that we are trying to record this, and that we'll be posting this on the website later this week if all goes well, and she'll be able to view that at her leisure, hopefully when things are functioning a little bit better for her. Okay. So what I was mentioning was so that even though there are some files that are used for embroidery purposes, such as those object files, they're not technically stitch files, so the deduper by default ignores those types of files. However, if we check this option here, this is saying to detect duplicates of non-embroidery files also. And now if this is checked, the deduper will look for exact duplicates of all file types. So that would include like Word documents or JPEG files, which are the picture files, or PDF documents or text files. Essentially all file types will be detected. It'll look for duplicates of all of those file types. So again, it only does preferred format processing for these formats that are listed here, which are stitch files. But if you have this checked, it will also look for exact duplicates of all file types. Now, you may be wondering, well, that seems like a good thing. Why isn't that turned on by default? Which sounds like a good question. So, so the reason for that is it definitely is much more thorough if you turn this option on. But there are some digitizers, in their design sets, they include not just the color chart for that particular design set that you're working with, but it's actually like a master color chart. So it's a color chart of all of their design sets instead of just the one. So for example, if you had the cute frog set from such and such digitizer, there may be a file in there that says like master color chart or mega color chart, whatever the case may be, or it's a catalog type file. And it covers not just that frogs set, but also all of their other sets like angels, FSL, etc. So what happens in those particular cases is if this is turned on, and let's say that you own two sets from that particular digitizer, like their angel set and their frog set, the deduper will, rightly so, identify the master color chart under frogs as being a duplicate of the one under the angel set. So it would want to remove that one from frogs. And so a couple of months later, when you go to sew out a frog on that perfect little outfit or whatever, there's no color chart in there because it's been removed previously because it was a duplicate of the one under angels. And it would be pretty confusing like it's unlikely that you would remember to yourself, oh yeah, the color chart to sew out this frog is actually in my angels folder, so I'll go up there and get it. So again, it is that's really about the only issue with checking this, and a lot of people aren't concerned about that because some people they don't even use color charts anyway. They just eyeball it and come up with their own color sets. So if you're one of those people that is not concerned about the master color chart thing, and again, it's only a few digitizers that do that, but if you're not concerned about that, it definitely is more thorough if you turn this on when you're deduping. But the reason it was not turned on was because it was turned on for the first week the deduper came out, but I had enough people asking me what was happening to their color charts so that I turned that off by default. So it was enough of a problem to warrant it being turned off by default. So again, it would be up to you, your preferences, as to whether or not you would like that turned on. And we'll see later that this implies that the deduper could be used for deduping other types of files as well. And we'll see an example of that later. But if you turn this on, for example, knowing that it would detect duplicates of, like, say, JPEG files, a lot of people use the deduper for cleaning up their digital pictures and things like that, other totally different folders that have nothing to do with embroidery. And you can do that quite easily here by turning on this option and deduping your digital pictures folder. And we'll see an example of that later. For now, I'm just going to turn that off. Now, the next section here is the probable duplicate processing. And we'll see a more in-depth example of this later, but essentially all this is saying is there are certain circumstances where when we do preferred format processing, we have to be very safe about some assumptions that we have to make. In order to do that, we have to limit the scope as to where we're looking for extraneous formats in. And then about a year and a half ago now, I spent several months implementing some extra logic. It's fairly complicated, actually, but essentially there's a bunch of fancy logic that can go on to try to identify special circumstances of extraneous formats, and this would go, it essentially is expanding the scope of its search while it's looking through stuff, but it's still doing that very safely. However, because of that expanded scope, if it detects extraneous formats using this expanded processing that's going on, it's possible it could make a mistake in identifying those. So that's why it classifies them as probable duplicates, and it's highly, highly likely that they're just extraneous formats. But we'll see an example where it does separate that into a separate window so that you have a chance of reviewing that list with a little extra scrutiny, just to make sure that it didn't mess up, because it is possible that it can make a mistake. It's probably still like 98% accurate, but it's still important that you review that file more carefully, or that result list more carefully than you normally would. But it's definitely recommended that you leave this expanded processing turned on, because it's much more thorough, and we'll see some examples of that. So again, a lot of people just leave these as the default values, which is just what we're looking at here, and it's perfectly fine for them. Next, remember if we had this option to move things to a duplicates folder, well, that's actually specified here in the folder preferences. You can see there's a number of folders, one being that duplicates folder, And we have to default to somewhere. So by default, it just makes a folder under wherever you installed the deduper. And so at least you have one there. It exists. However, it's usually not where you would really want to put your duplicates if you choose to save them. Most everyone that uses this feature, they change this to point to a more reasonable location, like on their external hard drive, a folder there, or somewhere other than here. It's generally not recommended that you put a bunch of user data, user files, under the program files subfolder, because this is considered a special, almost a system folder in Windows. So again, it will still function fine. It's generally not the ideal place to put things if you make use of this feature. If you don't use the feature to save off your duplicates to a separate folder and you just prompt and then delete them, then you can just leave this here. It doesn't matter because it's not used anyway. So if you do make use of it and you would like to change it, you just click the change button here, and then you pick out wherever you'd rather it be. And even if that's on a separate hard drive, like it may be one of those external hard drives, and you could just click there and pick whatever folder that you want to put it there, like under backups, or you might have an embroidery duplicates folder over there to dump stuff. And again, recall, if you change anything, ensure that you click Save These as my default preferences, and that way you don't have to change any of this business again. Now, we notice there's some other folders here, so let's just briefly talk about what those are. The log file folder, you never need to change that. That's just for internal, the deduper writes out some internal log files, and they're mainly used for debugging purposes. Like if you have trouble with something or didn't understand why a particular file was removed, or why it wasn't removed, which is usually the case when someone's asking me, then I may ask you to send me one of the log files that's located in there, and it can tell me a bunch of debugging type information. You don't have to worry about cleaning this out. It only saves the most 20 recent log files, and it cycles around. So don't be concerned about having to maintain it in some way. It's self-policing, if you will. There's a quarantine folder, and what that means is when the deduper tries to unzip a zip file or a RAR file, if it encounters any errors whatsoever when it's doing that, it will quarantine the file. It will put it in this folder here. And the rationale behind that is we don't want to just leave it in your normal embroidery stash because there's something wrong with the file. So it will take it out of there and put it into the quarantine. It will certainly notify you at the end of the job that, hey, I had some problems with the following zip files. They're corrupted in some way, and you may want to look at these manually when you have the opportunity. So so that's what the quarantine is for. If something gets quarantined, there's definitely something wrong with the file. It's corrupted in some way, but you still may want to go there and have a look. You can do that by clicking on View, and when things are there, it will put them in here for you to look at. Like this one here is a bad archive file. There's something wrong with that. So that's how you can look at your quarantine. You can click View here. If you were in Windows Explorer, you could just go straight there from that also. But if something gets quarantined, don't automatically just delete the quarantine files. It's recommended that you at least try to manually unzip them using a program like WinZip. And that's because even though the deduper could not unzip it, sometimes another program can. there's definitely something wrong with the file. It's corrupted in some way, but a program like WinZip is more tolerant of corruption than the deduper is. So the deduper, it doesn't tolerate corruption at all. So if there's any error whatsoever, it plays it safe and it puts the thing into quarantine so you can look at it further. A program like WinZip will sometimes ignore certain types of errors, and it still might be able to get the data for you. So that's why it's recommended that you at least give it a shot using like WinZip or something before just deleting the file. Now, nextly, there's the archive folder. So by default, and this is one of the reasons, it is the reason actually, why the deduper does not tolerate any level of corruption. And the reason for that is by default, if the deduper had 0 errors, like no problem whatsoever in unzipping a file, it assumes that you have no need for that zip file any longer, so it will delete the original zip file. This is the default behavior. Now, there is an option, because some people don't like it to do that, that instead of deleting the zip file, they would prefer to keep the original zip file and save that off somewhere and, for archival purposes, so they can back it up or whatever. Much the same as the duplicates folder. So if you wanted to do that, you have the option enabled, in other words, to save off the zip files, and we'll talk about where you turn that on shortly, but it would go here in the archives folder. And again, the default location for this is probably not where you would really want to save it. Most people would save this again to like an external hard drive, and they would have a subfolder called like original zips or something along those lines. There are a couple of other options for folders. By default, the deduper removes any empty folders it encounters along the way while it's scanning, or if it makes a folder empty because it removed all of the duplicates out of there, it normally would delete the empty folder as well. There are a few people that don't like it to remove empty folders, so if you're one of those people, just uncheck this. Just keep in mind that you might be left with a lot of empty folders out there. You can always enable it and then rescan the folder, and it will remove any empty folders it encounters along the way. Now, another thing is, if we have the options enabled to move stuff to these various folders, again, quarantine is not optional. It will always move them there if it has a problem. But the same with duplicates or archive, if you have those options enabled to save stuff there, by default it will preserve the folder paths when it moves theirs. And all that means, just to show you as an example of, it will look something like this. Notice how there's a C and a J. It will preserve the original path of where the folder came from, where the file came from. So see how it looks. There's a whole structure here. Well, this will mirror wherever it essentially looks just like wherever it came from, with the folder for the drive letter and that sort of thing. Okay there? Now, this makes it easy if you ever had to restore things back to how it was before when you started. Like, let's say this is the duplicates folder and you've decided to save them off here. If you ever wanted to put it back, all you have to do is cut or copy this and then just plop it right back to its original location. And because the folder structure is it's already in place, it will just overlay those files right back to where they were to begin with. So it's very easy to put things back the way they were if you maintain the folder paths. Another thing is, it's simple to tell for a given file where it came from, because it was right here. If you'll notice where I've highlighted that folder path, that was where the file was to begin with, before it was moved out of there. So there's a lot of advantages to keeping the folder paths there, and that's why it's turned on by default. If for some reason you don't like that feature, you can turn that off, and it will still work fine. But instead, when it moves stuff to, say, the duplicates folder, it would just pile them all into that one folder. So there's no original path information saved. It'll just pile them all under the duplicates folder, and it does make it more difficult, obviously, to determine where they came from in the first place, though. So I would recommend leaving this turned on. I think you'll have a lot fewer headaches later if you're ever looking at that again, because it's much easier to figure out where stuff came from. Now, lastly, we have this archive files. Now, an archive file is really a zip or a RAR file. The deduper just generically refers to it as an archive file. So logically, it thinks of a zip and a RAR as being the same thing. So there are two options here. One is to skip processing of zip and RAR files altogether. There's only a few people that use this feature that I'm aware of, but if you don't want the deduper to touch zip and RAR files at all, you can check this, and what would happen is it would only dedupe, or it would only process files that are not contained in the zip file. So essentially, it would still do preferred format processing and duplicate detection of all the files that are not zipped, but any zip files that you have, it assumes that you must have put those there for a reason, so it ignores them. So just keep that in mind. There are very few people that I'm aware of that make use of that feature, but you may be one of those people that would use that. But most people, they want the deduper to unzip stuff for them, so you would not want that to be checked. Now, the next option is to move zip and RAR files to the archive folder after successful extraction. And that goes back to that option here where I was mentioning, as long as there were no errors at all in the unzipping process, the deduper by default will delete that original zip file on the assumption that you don't want it anymore because you've already pulled the files out of it. But if you would like to save them off to the archive folder, this is what you would check here to make sure that that happens. And again, if you make any changes, always be sure to save that as your defaults for future projects. Okay, I know this took a substantial amount of time, but it's really because we were going through all of these options, and I think you'll find that going through the rest of this stuff will not take as long to go through all the examples here, now that we understand the settings. Okay, so now that we've set our settings, we now need to tell the deduper what folder or folders to process. Going back to our example, we have this downloads folder, and again, remember that could just be very well be a category folder like our Angels folder. The point here is that we don't want any duplicates under this whole darn folder, and we remember now that the main setting that's involved in that how many duplicates we can have in the folder is that dedupe level setting. And remember, we set that to a 1, which is the default value. So that means we don't want any duplicates under here. Oh, okay. So there are two ways to tell the deduper what folder to process. One is we can click this Add Folder button, and it comes up with a Browse for Folder, and we can go and navigate and eventually search for the folder that we want and hit OK. And we can keep doing that for each folder that we want to scan. A different way of doing that, though, is if you're familiar with Windows Explorer, you can drag and drop things. So let's say I want to process the downloads folder. If I left click and hold my left mouse button down, notice how I'm dragging that down to the deduper. And when I hovered over that taskbar item, it activated the deduper window, which brought it to the foreground. And notice how there's a plus sign next to the arrow. And that just means that it's a drop zone, meaning I can drop stuff into this area. So if I let go of my left mouse button, you'll see that the path, the folder location, has now appeared in this window. So you can pick your folder either way, this way or through here, and it does exactly the same thing. I've had a couple of customers, they get confused if I use drag and drop because they're concerned that I somehow moved the original folder. So I wanted to point out that I'm not moving anything. The folder is still in its original location. The drag and drop thing is really just I'm dragging and dropping the path to the folder into the deduper. Nothing else. Nothing about the folder is actually moving. So I just wanted to clarify that. You may notice that there didn't really seem to be a whole lot of time savings from the drag and drop thing or this thing. So you could do this either way if all you're doing is just one folder. But we'll see later the drag and drop method can be a lot more advantageous if you want to scan a lot of folders at one time. And we'll see an example of that later. So again, let's just have a look here, the before picture of the downloads folder. And notice there are several zip and RAR files, and then some freestanding embroidery files out here that happen to be different formats. So we should now start the dedupe process, and notice that there are some statistical counters here at the bottom. Those will be increasing as we go along so that you have a good feel of how things are progressing and ensure that the deduper is actually doing something. So we click this Begin Dedupe button, and then there's a warning message, and all this is saying is it's a reminder to the user that be sure to set up that formats and dedupe level settings because that's really important. And that the other settings are all documented in that program help file. So if you ever forget what a particular setting means, if you have a look at your program help, which is up under here, it contains a description of all of the various settings, and there's also a getting started section in there and a deduping rules of thumb. The rules of thumb is very helpful in that it describes the file type priority and the dedupe level setting, which again are the two most important settings. And I think it does that in a very nice compact way. So if you ever get confused or you forget a lot of all these settings, be sure to look at the program help, particularly that getting started section. I think you would find that to be very helpful. There's finally a warning here in that you should not choose to dedupe your entire system drive, your hard drive. And by your hard drive, what I mean is your internal system drive, which is usually your C drive, and that's where the Windows operating system is installed on. If you dedupe that drive, it can potentially cause some problems. The only problem I've ever seen that actually happens when people do that is it actually messes up the deduper itself because it dedupes its own folder structure, and it will remove some empty folders that are out there for the deduper to work, so it won't ever work again until you reinstall the deduper. So that in and of itself is fairly minor, but the main point is that if you dedupe your whole hard drive, your C drive in particular, keep in mind that you would be deduping the Windows folder, which is where the operating system is installed, and essentially all of the application folders where your applications are installed. And there may be some applications that purposely need duplicates of a particular file out there, or they might need an empty folder. So that's why it's not recommended that you do that. Again, if you did, it's probably didn't really cause any harm other than to the deduper itself, which can be fixed by just way of a reinstall. But still, it's not recommended in general. If you store all of your designs on like an external hard drive, then it's fine to dedupe that, because you're not deduping like other types of files. The main point here is if you don't want to dedupe folders that you're not familiar with what's in the content of those folders. So, because you don't know what their requirements are, so you just don't want to mess with those. So I hope that makes sense. If you don't want to see this warning in the future, you just click this and it'll carry on from there on out. So I'm going to hit continue deduping, and you'll notice these statistical counters will increase. This will be quite rapid, so I'll move the next window down so that we can look at what the counters actually said. So it just deduped that downloads folder, and if we have a look here, you'll see it saw 23 files that it looked at. It uncompressed, meaning unzipped, 4 files. There were no problems encountered. Those are that quarantine stuff. It didn't find any problems with the zip files. There were 5 exact duplicates and 2 unwanted formats found, and it did that in 1 second. So the first window that's displayed is the duplicate summary window. And if you'll recall, we had the option turned on to prompt us before deleting the files. So that's what this window is for. It's saying that here are all the duplicate or non-preferred files that are found, and on the right-hand side are all the original or preferred files that it intends to keep. All of these files are pre-selected to be deleted, but if for some reason you really didn't want to delete one, you could uncheck it as you see fit, and it will not delete that one. So let's look at the rows design first. If you'll recall, we had PEZ as our most preferred format. So what this is saying is the rows DST and rows HUS files, the more preferred file is the PEZ one. So it's going to delete this file in favor of this one. The same is true for the HUS file in favor of the PEZ file. Now, we had a freebie by Susan zip file which actually contained 3 files within it, bowl 1, 2, and 3 PEZ files. But the problem is that Susan, maybe it was because it's a freebie and she didn't pay much attention, but in any case, she included 3 copies of the same file. Bowl 1 and 2 and 3 were all the identical files. They just happen to have different names. So she accidentally put the wrong design files in that zip file. So what this is saying is that bowl 2 is the same as bowl 1, so it wants to remove bowl 2. And bowl 3 is also the same as bowl 1, so it's going to remove that guy. And then finally, remember Susan.zip, that was actually just a whole copy of Freebie by Susan. It was an exact copy that we hadn't realized we had downloaded twice maybe. So all 3 bowls within Susan.zip were all duplicates of bowl 1 in Freebie by Susan. So it wants to remove all 3 of those. And then furthermore, what will happen is if it removes these, it will leave the Susan subfolder empty, and it will then remove the Susan subfolder because it's empty, and we have the option enabled to remove empty folders. So the end result is that Susan.zip and its contents will just be totally gone because it was a duplicate. After reviewing this list, we can either skip the deletion altogether, meaning don't delete any of these, or we normally would review it and then delete selected files and proceed. And keep in mind that when it deletes the files, it's truly deleting them. It doesn't send them to the recycle bin. It's actually getting rid of them. Now, if you had chosen the option to okay, so Joy has a question. Let me unmute. Okay, Joy, I believe you're unmuted now. Can you... Are you there, Joy?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's a chance that bowl 1 and bowl 2 were the same file but in different size, maybe like a 4x4 and 5x7.
Okay, that's a good question, and thank you for bringing it up. So, okay, so the answer, I'll go ahead and mute everyone again so that people can hear adequately. So for those of you who may not have heard the question, it was, well, what if, what if bowl 1 and 2 were actually different sizes, or say if bowl 2 and 3 were really just different sizes of bowl 1, so it's the same design, but they're just resized in some way. So the answer there would be, if that were the case, technically they're not the same design because they're actually different sizes. So the deduper would know that they are not the same, and it would leave them alone. So it would keep the different sizes of the design. Even if visually it looked like the same design, if a single stitch is different about the design, which it would be if they're different sizes, then the deduper will know that they aren't the same, and it will keep it. Okay, so Jody is asking, well, you have two files on the right side with the same name. How does Windows know they are not dupes? So, and I'm hoping I'm understanding here. So we're listing bowl 1 here and also bowl 1 here. But what this is saying is the deduper, these are actually referring to the exact same file. But if you have to look at the duplicate summary window as one row at a time. So if you're going along on this first row, the deduper is saying, hey, I want to delete bowl2.pes because it's the same as bowl1.pes. Okay, so now let's go to the next row, which is really independent of any of the other rows here. The deduper is saying, I want to delete bowl3 because it's the same as bowl1. So in other words, you can have several files here on this side that all point back to the same file on this side. Much like rows DST and HUS, these are less preferred formats than when compared to rows.pes. So essentially this side is the reason these are being removed. I hope that makes sense. So the deduper is just trying to say, the reason I intend to remove these is because of this guy here. And sometimes, so from this screen, it will only keep 2 files. Let me see if that's true. Joy just put a thing out there. That is correct. So it intends to remove these 7 files, and Joy just mentioned, and rightly so, that it will only keep 2 files because there's only 2 distinct files in this whole list of the 7. And then I think Jody tried to ask a question in the chat window, but it's incomplete there. So I'm not sure. Jody, would you mind, for some reason it only showed up the first 4 characters there. So, or I could unmute you, and maybe you could give it a whirl there.
Hi. My question is when you're trying to save items into a folder
Yes.
and it has the same name as something else that is in the folders, Windows will ask you, do you want to write over the original? That was my question.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jody. Okay, I'll mute you guys again. So, what Jody is saying is if you're downloading, say, a file, or you're copying a file from one folder to the other, Windows will, if you already have a file by the same name in your target folder, Windows will ask you if you want to overwrite. It'll say, hey, you've already got a file by this name. Do you want to overwrite it? Now, there are some people, that's a very good question, Jody. So there are some people that think that Windows is doing some really fancy advanced logic going on there, where it's saying that you actually have a duplicate file. But keep in mind that that is not true. Well, all it is telling you is that there's a file that happens to have the same name in that same folder, and whether or not you want to overwrite it. So what will oftentimes happen is I have seen some potential customers, they believe that Windows is protecting them from getting duplicates and things because it will tell them if they already have the file by the same name. And it's true that it will at least do that, but that doesn't mean, just because they have the same name, that does not mean that they're actually duplicate. The contents of it is the same as what they're moving. And if you choose to overwrite it, it will in fact overwrite and get rid of the old file altogether, and it goes into Never Never Land. So that's generally not recommended. So I guess my point is that Windows, and there are some programs out there that will do things such as unzipping files, and it does simple renaming just to make sure that it won't overwrite things. Or in some cases, there are some programs, if you just unzip a bunch of zip files in one whack, it won't even rename the files. If there's a file name collision is what this is called, and it will actually just overwrite whatever is there on the assumption that that it's the same content just because it has the same name. So just be wary of things that do that sort of thing, because they can be dangerous in that they will overwrite some of your files potentially, and you would be totally unaware that that has happened until later down the line when you're looking for that file and you mysteriously can't find it when you're looking for it. I hope that answers your question, Jody. Okay, so Joy asked a question. Will the deduper check all aspects of the stitch file for duplicates, even if it has different names? Oh, thank you, Jody. So the answer is yes. So this is what has happened here in this example. So if we look here, the names are different here, bowl 2 and bowl 3, but the content is identical to bowl 1. So when it's looking for exact duplicates, it does actually look at the individual bytes in computer speak, the low-level bytes of the file. It pays no attention to the file name whatsoever when it's doing exact duplicate detection, which is what's shown on these first two and these last three rows. It's saying, hey, I don't care what the file name is. I'm looking at the content, and the content is the same as this one over here. And that's why if you've resized a file, it will know that they're not the same. Like even if you had two files that had the same name, but one was a different size than the other, obviously they'd have to be in separate subfolders to have the same name for the reasons that Jody had mentioned earlier. that Windows won't let you have two files by the same name in the same folder. But even if you had two files in different subfolders that happen to have the same name, but are technically not the same content, the deduper will know that they are not the same and will ignore them. And it will leave them there. And this comes into play quite often with like your alphabets folder, where it's very common to have A.pes, B.pes, C.pes, and so on under a given font subfolder, and another font will have exactly the same file names, but obviously they're different designs under there. So the point is that the deduper knows that they aren't the same, and it will leave them alone, even if they happen to have the same name. Now that's for exact duplicate detection. For preferred format processing, which is like this rows scenario, there it can't do a binary comparison, meaning a low-level stitch-by-stitch comparison, and the reason for that is they aren't really the same files. If you think about it, it's a totally different format. So although to a human the designs may look to be the same if you visualize them on your screen or sewn out, internally they're totally different. They're encoded in a totally different way. So it's almost like from a word processor file, you might have a file in Microsoft Word, and if you save that same file in WordPerfect, although the document might look very similar, internally it's represented completely differently because it's their own proprietary format as to how they store the stuff. So the deduper does some other logic to do preferred format processing, and it has to make some assumptions on equivalency, and those assumptions are, for example, normal preferred format processing happens only within the same folder, and then if the base name, which is the part before the extension, is the same across other embroidery files within the same exact folder, it assumes that they're actually different formats of the same design. And that's an extremely safe assumption. The deduper has been used to scan tens of millions of files, and I've yet to see it make a mistake about that particular assumption. But I just wanted to point that out, that it can't do a perfect comparison because they're not perfectly equivalent. So it has to make some assumptions in a very safe way to determine equivalence in a different manner. Now, recall that there was an option in the preferences that said something about probable duplicates, and that's that expanded scope stuff that I referred to, and we'll see an example of that where we can do preferred format processing outside of the current subfolder under certain circumstances and still be pretty safe about it. So we'll cover that in just a moment. Now, Mary has asked a question, well, what about if the same design is done in different colors? Is that the same or different? And the answer is that that will be a different design. So the deduper would recognize those as being different designs, and it will leave them alone. The reason for that is you may purposely change a color in a design for some experimental purposes or something. So they're really not the same design, although they look, the structure is identical, and so are the dimensions and that sort of thing. But the color, there's actually a color change embedded in the file, which means that the byte-for-byte comparison will fall through at that point. So it will know that they're not the same. So if a single stitch or a single color is altered, it will recognize them as being different. Okay then. So now carrying on here, excuse me. I'm going to choose to delete these selected files. Again, if you chose the option to save the duplicates to a separate duplicates folder, you would have a very similar screen to this, showing you what it all found and everything, but it would also tell you that I moved these off to the duplicates folder and here's where it's located. So again, it's the same concept. It will still show you what it found, except that it will also tell you that it moved them off over to the duplicates folder. In this case, because we're going to delete them, I'm going to click the Delete Selected Files and Proceed button. Now, because we had probable duplicates processing turned on, we show here any probable duplicates that were found, and it didn't find anything where that was more questionable about it, so that's just showing us blank. And again, we'll review a case of probable duplicates in just a short moment. So in the meantime, I'll click Next, and that's really about it. It's saying that it saved this in a report file if we care to look at it, but otherwise we just click Finished. Now, if we dedo this again, it obviously won't find anything because we just cleaned it all up. Now let's have a look back here to see what it did to our downloads folder. Now I know previously Janet had put on our website about unzipping into separate subfolders. So I want to touch on that very briefly then. When the deduper sees a zip file, when it goes to unzip it, what happens is it will create a subfolder by the same name and put the contents of the zip file under there. So for example, recall that we had a cherrybowl.rar file. We now have a subfolder called cherrybowl, so it's the same name other than the extension, and now the contents of that are located here. And I want to go over some of the rationale behind the subfolder creation. A zip file or a RAR file is really, logically, it's a compressed folder. So actually, even in Windows Vista now, when you're looking at Windows Explorer, if you look at a zip file, it actually looks just like a folder, the icon, except it's got a zipper going through it, which further, indicates that it's actually just a compressed folder. Like logically, it can contain a multitude of files and subfolders that could have other subfolders within it. So it can have entire folder structures located within it. So one of the issues is that a zip file can be used for different purposes. So one is just for pure compression. Like we have a bunch of files and we want to just compress them as much as possible, and that's all we care about it for. The other use of a zip file is for packaging several files together that are related to each other in some way. So a third use of a zip file is for both of the combination of those first two options. That's to logically package files together that are related, presumably in some way, and then also to compress all of that together to save space. So the reason the deduper creates a subfolder is because it has to assume that the files were put into a zip file for purposes of packaging. So the files are somehow related to each other, and that there was a good reason for them to be grouped together. And that's primarily in the cases of embroidery files that also have auxiliary files like JPEG images and color charts. So if there's a color chart in the zip file, then that color chart is presumably for the designs in that zip folder, in that zip file. And a lot of times they'll just call it colorchart.txt. So it's assumed that that color chart, because it's co-located with the designs, then it's actually applicable to those designs. So we've had a lot of requests. Well, why can't you just unzip the zip file right where it's at? You know, just put all the files that were under Cherry Bowl straight under here, under the downloads folder. And if there were extra auxiliary files in there, that could be dangerous, because now the color chart.txt file is out here in the open in the downloads folder. So if Pretty Lace also had a color chart.txt file in that zip file, now it would be out here too. So you would have a file named collision, which would mean that we would need to rename one of them with a sequence number on the end. But if you multiply that times, say, 30 zip files that maybe have that particular circumstance, now you would have 30 color charts with different sequence numbers, and it would be very difficult for a human to know that color chart 17 corresponds to the Cherry Bowls, and color chart 3 corresponds to the Pretty Lace. I hope that makes sense, but there are some dangers in trying to flatten the zip file. So the reason the deduper makes a subfolder for the zip files is it tries to take the safe route and assume that the files are in the zip file because they are somehow related to each other and that they should be logically grouped together. Now, that being said, oh, and a lot of the cataloging software okay, so Janet was just saying that she would like if this were somehow resolved. So I was just going to mention that a lot of the software out there, like such as Designer's Gallery, for example, or Buzz Tools, for example, there are options to view all of the subfolders anyway. So what happens is it is actually using recursive structures, so it's actually displaying all of the contents of the subfolders anyway. So it doesn't hinder your ability to view the files. Now, there's some other software that may not be able to do that. So a lot of people would like to be able to see all of the subfolder contents in one shot, or just not have the subfolders. So again, it's always been much safer to create the subfolder on the assumption that the contents in there is logically related in some way, and it's very dangerous to not make that assumptions. So so that being said, I've had enough requests to have more intelligent subfolder creation, or lack thereof, in some cases. So I have been working for several months now on an enhancement to the deduper. It will likely be an add-on, so it will be chargeable. It would probably be maybe $5 for those people that are interested in adding some extra processing to that folder stuff when zip files are involved. So I'm hoping to have that out in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for that if you may be interested. Again, most people, the subfolder creation, it doesn't bother them because the software they have can view subfolders anyway. But there are some people that, for whatever reason, their software may not view the subfolders all in one shot, so they might like it to be flattened a bit more. So again, I'm working on this thing, an add-on, and it's essentially it's called the folder consolidation add-on, and it's essentially would indicate some things, like, for example, cases like this where we have we're left with 4 lace files within this folder. You would be able to set a threshold to say, hey, if there are no auxiliary files, like there aren't any color charts or JPEGs in here that support this stuff. And if I have fewer than X number of embroidery files in the subfolder, then instead move them up to the parent folder. So essentially these 4 files here would actually be located straight under here, right alongside the rows folder, or the rows design rather. So it would effectively eliminate a lot of the subfolder creation. It would still create a subfolder, however, if there were supporting files like text files and JPEGs where it's too dangerous to move them to the upper level folder. But in a lot of these cases where there are only embroidery files, you would be able to set thresholds to decide when to move it up to the parent and when not to. And it could do that for existing folders or zip folders. So I hope that makes sense, and that may be helpful to some of you, who would like it to do more flattening type stuff. So just keep an eye out for that. We'll make an announcement and it'll be on our website, but it'll likely be an add-on because it took a substantial amount of work to implement. And I'm hoping to have that out in about 2 or 3 more weeks, hopefully, if all goes well. But it'll only be maybe $5 or something. And that's only if you actually are interested in that feature. So I'm sorry that took a while, but I wanted to cover the rationale behind the creation of the subfolders, and it's always much safer to do that versus not. But I understand that there are some desires to, to have that done a bit differently in certain cases where there's really not a need to have a subfolder for every single case. So I hope that will address that situation. So back to the downloads folder. We'll notice that we now just have a rows .pes file, and the DST and HUS files have now been removed. And now we have a separate subfolder for Cherry Bowl, Pretty Lace, and Freebie by Susan. And recall that Freebie by Susan was a duplicate of Susan.zip. So the Susan.zip was totally removed because it was an exact copy all the way across the board of Freebie by Susan. And Freebie by Susan now just has the one bowl remaining because the other 2 were duplicates of the first. So if you have any questions on this first folder, please let me know in the chat window. Otherwise, I'll carry on to some more advanced situations here, and we'll cover some of those. And that will go, again, much more quickly than the first example there. So our next example is a little more complicated, and this would be if you wanted to clean up your existing embroidery collection or to maintain cleanliness, if you will. So a lot of people organize their designs in like a top-level embroidery folder, and then you have several category folders within that. Now, although I have 4 category folders here, keep in mind that most people might have over 100 category folders, depending upon how much of a download junkie you might be. So we have several designs here, and under a given category you could have multiple subfolders under that, and so on and so forth. We have a lot of stuff here, designs, Easter designs, lace, so on and so forth. Now, remember we had this whole concept of lace angel. If we had a lace angel, we might purposely want a copy of her under angels and under our lace folder. So if we were to do our whole top-level embroidery folder at a level 1, a dedupe level 1, it would find that this angel under lace is a duplicate of the one under angels. So let's see how we would go about getting the deduper to not do that. So remember under our preferences in the dedupe level setting, there's the concept of second level. So what this is saying is, even though I told you to dedupe this folder, embroidery, instead scan all the files there, but maintain uniqueness one level down, at the second level below the folder I told you to scan. So what happens then is it would be the same thing as if I told it to scan each category folder at a dedupe level of 1. So it would allow duplicates across the folders, across the category folders, but not within each one. I hope that makes sense. So what you could do in that case, if we set it to 2, is we could say, okay, scan embroidery, but it would scan each of these folders independently of each other. And even if you had 100 category folders, it would do, again, each one, and it would allow the duplicates across them, but not within each one. So that's the only reason you would really ever want to use second level. It has nothing to do with how deep it scans in the folder structure. It only deals with the level at which it maintains uniqueness. So perhaps counterintuitively, the first level is actually more thorough than the second level. The first level says no dupes are allowed within the entire folder that I'm scanning. If the second level does allow some duplicates, and that's just across what we would call category folders. Now, some people get really confused by the whole dedupe level thing. So it's possible to still do your entire embroidery folder collection with a level 1. So I hope everyone understands the dedupe level 2 setting, and some people are perfectly happy with using that, but it doesn't allow you a whole lot of flexibility. It assumes uniformity across these category folders, like it's perfectly fine just to do 1, 1, 1, 1, and carry on. And there aren't any goofy folders in here that are that need to be handled a little different because of whatever reason they're organized weird. So as long as everything's quite uniform and you don't mind doing your entire embroidery collection every time you dedupe, you can use the second level and it will still work. Most people, though, leave it at a level 1, and there's an alternate way to do that. So let's say that we still wanted to scan our entire embroidery collection. What you can do is in Windows Explorer, you can hold down the Shift key when selecting folders, or the Control key, and it allows you to select multiple folders at the same time. Now what we can do is drag all of those over to the deduper, and notice how it selected all of them in one whack. So even though we had our dedupe level set to 1, what happens is when you have more than one folder selected in the deduper, it will process each one of these independently of each other. So this would still allow the lace angel duplicate in angels and lace. That would still be fine because lace is being done independently of angels. Now, this allows, to me, I prefer doing things this way at a level 1 because it's very easy to understand. It's not confusing at all to think that the level 1, you're just saying for each of these folders, don't allow any duplicates under each one. Now, this also allows a lot of flexibility in that for some reason, if Easter was one of those goofy ones that I can't process like all the rest because whatever reason, I need to do that differently somehow, it's easy to deselect certain ones, so you have a lot more flexibility in what folders you do at one time and which ones you don't. So now when we have a question here. So the question was, when I cleared the list, it didn't clear the files processed. I believe that's down here, and that's true. This list only gets cleared when we click the Begin Dedupe button or if we create a new project. So normally this is independent of this. They kind of just work independently. This will get reset if I click this Begin Dedupe button. It'll reset back to 0. Okay? So if our dedupe level is set to 1, if we have more than one folder selected in here, I don't know if you noticed, but this little thingy here appeared as well. And we can see it says detect exact duplicates across the chosen folders. And what that does is if you select that, now it would not allow the duplicate across angels and lace, because now they're no longer processed independently of each other, they're processed as a whole. In other words, it won't allow any duplicates across these 3 entire folders. So both within the folders and across them, it maintains uniqueness across the whole bunch. And this is helpful in cases where you're trying to merge folders together or something along those lines. That's where you might want to use this option. But again, by default, they're done independently of each other, which is generally what you want to have happen. So it's very easy to detect duplicates across them if you would like to. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now, now we talked about this whole concept of probable duplicates. So let's talk a little bit more about some more advanced things. And probable duplicates have a special circumstance. So you may have seen a lot of collections that were distributed this way, in that there's a design, there's a folder here, and then there are multiple subfolders, and each of those subfolders has a format, like Pez, Jeff, so on. But you'll notice that the files themselves are identical. They're actually just extraneous formats of the same designs. But remember, when we do preferred format processing, the deduper has to be really safe because of certain assumptions that have to be made. And so there's some expanded processing that occurs if you have probable duplicate processing turned on, which is what I would prefer you to do. So what that's saying is, instead of just looking in my local folder for extraneous formats, there are certain cases, if you look at this one as compared to this one, for example, the base name, the part before the extension, is still the same. And so the only thing that's different is really the format of the file, but the problem is that it's not co-located in the exact same folder. It's in a folder right next to it. So if you think about this file compared to that other one, what it really is it's a cousin of the other, and it's because those two files share the same grandparent folder, stallions. And their parent folders are siblings of each other, and they're special kinds of siblings. And that means that they're named in a certain way. That makes them special. See how the name actually has an embroidery format embedded in the name. So the deduper, with the expanded logic turned on, the probable duplicates, it tries to, there's a lot of fancy things that are going on there, but it will essentially attempt to identify cases like this, where there are cousin files out there, and it will still do preferred format processing. Even though it's outside of the current folder, it will expand its scope to include all files within the same grandparent folder for certain cases. So this is extremely thorough, and it's very accurate. However, because of this extended logic, we're expanding the level of risk that could be involved, because it's possible for the deduper to make a mistake in this kind of processing. And so so when it's doing that, if it identifies any extraneous formats by way of this kind of processing, it calls it a probable duplicate, and it will always show that in a separate window so that you know that those files were identified by way of this expanded processing logic. And it's important for you to review the list with a little extra scrutiny, just to be a little bit more thorough when you're reviewing that list, just to make sure it didn't mess up somewhere. It's still probably 98% accurate, but there is a small chance that it could make an error, and that's why it's important for you to look at it a little more closely just to verify that it didn't. If it does make a mistake, it's very obvious. It will jump out to you that it messed up, but it's highly recommended that you leave this option on because it's much more thorough. And let's have an example of that. We can see the stallions thing. Notice under Cecilia, it's the same kind of deal, stitch files. Under Baby Aloha, it's the same concept, but notice that the naming convention's a bit different. They're still, it's more English-like, Brother Baby Like Pez, Commercial, Husqvarna Viking, Foff, VIP, and so on. But it's still the same concept here. So let's see what the deduper does if we try to clean out the cousins folder. Let's just make sure that option's turned on, and that's right here. Again, if you don't like this kind of processing, you can turn it off entirely. It's turned off by default if you ever just delete duplicates. It doesn't even do this, but I highly recommend you leave it on. About the only time it can make a mistake, that I've really seen it make a mistake, is if you dedupe your alphabets folder. It can make mistakes in there because it's much more likely that you could have files by the same name in different formats in different subfolders that have a common grandparent. It's still pretty rare, but generally, if you're not doing your alphabets folder, it's fine. It doesn't make a mistake really, but it's really only your alphabets that you should really give it a good look over just to make sure it didn't do something goofy. But now let's go ahead and dedupe this and see what it finds here. As you can see, it's scanning along. Now it found 70 regular duplicate preferred format stuff. This stuff, it's incredibly sure it's a duplicate. So you can look this over to get warm fuzzies, but really if it's here, you don't need to worry about it. It's a duplicate. But now, our probable duplicates, notice it found over 1,100 of those guys. Now, if we look here, we'll see that there's Baby Aloha design files, Artista art, and then there's a bunch of art files. Well, let's look at what the preferred file is. It's Brother Baby Like Pez, and then the Pez equivalent. So notice how this is a whole separate subfolder, but it still managed to do the preferred format processing across it. If we scroll down a bit, you'll notice the same thing for DST, and so on and so forth, for VIP, Hus, Jeff, and so on. And now for art, I don't know why my screen goofs up here. For the art, this is under Cecilia. It's the same thing, and it's going to start over. So we can see there's a bunch of files here that all have the same circumstance. They're all these cousins of each other. And it found 1,100 of them just in this one cousins folder. So now, if I click on Delete Selected Files, if there are thousands of duplicates, it can take a bit of time to delete all of that stuff. So you'll want to make sure that it's actually doing something. So if you watch this file in the upper left-hand corner, these numbers, you'll see them increasing as I hit delete. So see how it's deleting them now? And now it's deleted. And the first time you run the deduper, it's not uncommon for it to find tens of thousands of duplicates. So, you know, it could take a couple of minutes to delete that many files. So that's something to be aware of. You'll see it progressing as it's going along. And now it's done. So if you'll notice, we went through 1,400 files to begin with. If we dedupe this again, notice it has narrowed this down to only 360 something files now. So it's squeaky clean now. So I hope that makes sense about the cousin processing and why it's highly recommended that you turn that on. we also had the, I think I mentioned that you could dedupe your digital pictures if you wanted to. So let's have a look there. If you'll notice under this digital pictures example, I have several duplicates of the same pictures. So what we can do there is we can go to our preferences, and remember that there's an option to detect duplicates of non-embroidery files also. So if we check mark that, recall that even though there's stuff pertaining to embroidery here, preferred format processing, and all this business, it'll still look for embroidery files, and if it finds one, attempt to do preferred format processing on it. But because we don't have any embroidery files anyway in here, this is irrelevant. So just keep that in mind, that you can dedupe things that have nothing to do with embroidery. Even though this is normally geared for embroidery, it doesn't really matter. So another nice thing is that we have the concept of project files. So you can do a save project file. So we can set this as digital pictures, for example. And we've now saved this as our digital pictures project. So anytime you want to go clean up your digital pictures, you can just go File, Open Project, and pick that project file, and it already saves all of the folders that you had selected, along with all of the settings that were pertinent. So notice how this is saved. So you could basically have a digital pictures project file that already has the correct options set for your purposes, and just load that up when you need to dedupe that. And Nancy has to leave, so thank you, Nancy, and I'm glad you understand it a bit more. And again, we're going to try to record this and upload it to our website so that you guys can view it at your leisure. So so hopefully that will be helpful, and thank you again. And we'll be finishing up here momentarily. For the rest of you, you know, if you want to stick by for a few minutes later, that would be good too. Thank you, Nancy. So the point here about the projects is that you can have a number of different projects, just like when we were doing our embroidery. If you have a lot of category folders, you could divide that up into separate projects. So you could dedupe your categories from like A through F and have a project file called A through F, and then G through K, and so on and so forth, and then just load up that one project file, and it'll already have all of your settings and folders picked for you, and then just run the dedupe job straight against that. So I hope that might be helpful to you. The project files can be very nice to have. So if we dedupe this guy, we'll notice it's processing along here and finding quite a bit of duplicates. And it actually found 88 duplicates of the JPEG files. And even the thumbs.db, which is your thumbnail database cache file in Windows Explorer, it found that as a duplicate as well. And so it's going to remove all of the ones under Directory 2 that were copies of Directory 1. So if we remove that and go back to digital pictures, let me refresh Windows Explorer, we'll see that the Directory 2 is totally empty. It would normally remove that, but there must be something that has a lock on, there must be something that has a lock on that folder. Let me try to dedupe it again to remove it. There it goes. Okay. You'll notice that actually dir 2 was a total copy of dir 1. So we actually deleted all of those picture files out of there, probably 100 megabytes worth of files there in just a few moments. You know, a matter of seconds, actually. So that's very handy to have along if you have people, you know, that may not do embroidery in your family, but they do other stuff like scrapbooking with a bunch of digital pictures and that sort of stuff. And then finally, I just want to go over a quick a tip that is not so obvious, and that's in the case of merging files together, or merging folders. So there may be some cases where you've had a crash of some sort and you have to back up or restore some files or folders off of various backup places, and the quality of that data may be questionable. So really, the only time you would want to get a file from that restored area is only if you don't already have it somewhere else. It's kind of like the last resort area. And plus it may be really disorganized over there in that restored folder, so you don't want to have to reorganize it in any way if you already have the file sorted out to begin with. So in the case of this example, let's say that we have some category folders, golf and pets, and then we have messed up restored from backup folder, which we can see the contents of that has several subfolders, golf, pets, and then there's another category which we don't even already have yet called houses. Notice that under our restored area, under pets there's a bird file under there, and golf, it looks like a house, but just imagine it being a golfer, because I messed up. So under houses, there's a bird house of some kind. Now, in our merge folder, we already have that same design in our golf category already. And under pets, we already have that bird, and we even have some extra stuff in there, like a stallion. So we really just want stuff from this messed up area that we don't already have elsewhere. So, knowing what we know about the deduper now, if we select these three folders, we would obviously want to detect duplicates across all three of them. So we check this option here. But now here's the trick here. The deduper, if you'll notice, things are sorted here in alphabetical order. That means the deduper actually processes the files and folders in alphabetical order. And this is a very general perspective here. Oh, thank you, Jody. Jody needs to leave, but she likes the product. So thank you, Jody, for joining. And again, we'll try to put a recording up for any section that you might miss or want to review later. So thank you very much. So in this case, we want to detect duplicates, but because it does things in alphabetical order, it was going to scan pets last, which is not what we want, because anything under pets, if we already have it in our messed up folder, it's going to want to remove those from pets. Remember, that bird was a duplicate there that we could just see from a visual perspective, but remember, we could have thousands of files here, so it's not like you can just eyeball it. So what we want to do is make the deduper scan the messed up restored from backup folder the very last, because it's our last resort. So a way to do that is actually just to rename the folder. Let me clear this list now. So let's just rename this folder. We would just rename it with a bunch of Z's at the beginning of the folder. That way, it's always guaranteed to be scanned last. So it's going to look at all your golf, all of your pets, and any other category stuff first. And then it will review the ZZZZ messed up restored from backup folder at the very last. So anything in this folder, if you already have it somewhere else, the one under this folder will be considered a duplicate of the other locations, so it will want to remove that. So at the end of the day, after you finish deduping, the only thing left in the messed up restored from backup folder are things that you don't have somewhere else already. So it's really and truly just the things that you had to restore that you did not already have elsewhere. So if we do a begin dedupe on that, sure enough, we'll see that under the messed up restored from backup things, this bird and this golf thing are actually duplicates of things you already had in your normal category folder, so it's going to remove them out of this restored area. So, and if we go back here, notice that the ZZZZ, the two subfolders that were under there are totally gone, and it's because after removing the duplicates, they were emptied folders, so we in turn removed the empty folders out of there. So now we're only left with things like this house that we didn't already have somewhere else. And what was in our pets folder is still safe. It's just like it used to be. And the same is true with our golf. So I hope that that is a helpful tidbit of information, and it's not really obvious that that would be the case, and that's how you would go about doing it. But if you know the secret of that it actually processes things generally in alphabetical order, that's useful information, and you can use it to your advantage that way. So this pretty much concludes the demonstration and the webinar. Unless some of you have more questions, you know, that you'd like to ask that I could answer right away. Otherwise, again, I'll try to record this, or I'll try to export this recording up onto our website, and hopefully it will actually work and you can look at it at your leisure. Okay, yes. So very good. Yeah, so this is very helpful. So does anyone else have any questions they would like to bring up? Oh, and Debbie had one particular question about the, you know, in addition to, say, if you had a design in angel and lace, what if you wanted it in a third or fourth category that might be by the digitizer? Would that be fine? And the answer is yes. As long as it's in a separate subfolder like this, a separate folder, category folder, you could have that fine. So you might have a separate separate category folder like called Anita Good Design or Zunt, for example. So you could have one of the beautiful designs from Zunt, like a floral design. You might have a copy of it under Zunt, and also under floral, and also under some other category that you'd like to put it in, and that'd be fine, because as long as they're at the same level of each other, you can process them this way and they'll be independent of each other, and that would be fine. Okay. Alrighty then. And if you have any other questions that you think of later, and Joyce just asked a question, what's the latest version? And right now, that is version 2.9. And if you can do that by looking at that by Help About. And if you don't have that, you can go to our website, and there's a, on the navigation side, on the left-hand side, it says Software Updates. And you can go there and download the latest update. So I have all my designs external hard drive, so I could do the external drive instead of the C drive. The answer is yes. So if you have your designs on an external drive, which is quite common these days, that might show up as like your F drive or your J drive. You still want to install the deduper on your internal C drive. So always install it there, but you can dedupe any drive that you can see. So, so for example, we have our designs on the J drive here. So I might want to dedupe this folder and see it's on the J drive, and that'd be perfectly fine. And you can save that into your project files and everything, and it'll be fine. You can even dedupe files that are shared over the network. If it was on a different computer in your house and you had an internal Windows network set up and were sharing one of the folders as a shared folder on the network, it's possible to even dedupe stuff over the network that way on network mounted folders. It's obviously slower when you're doing that, but it does work. So just keep that in mind. obviously you would need to know something about Windows networking, in order to set that up. But if you do have that set up, it is possible to do that.